Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Ask Adam. It is the month of July, June. Where are we? What are we in?
June.
It's getting hot. I know that for sure.
Yes.
And this month, our topic is multiply. I know in the last episode, I actually said it was like expansion or something like that, but I was wrong. It's actually multiply. Genesis 1:28. And Pastor Adam's verse of choice is be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. So, Pastor, before we get started, because our questions actually don't have anything to do with the topic of the month, I was hoping that you could maybe give us a little, do you have some kind of idea of where you'll be going this month with Multiply, or if you can talk about it a little bit?
Well, we're taping this on the first week of June, and we've had one Sunday service. We have a Wednesday coming tomorrow at this taping. Last Sunday, I was hoping to let everybody be aware that when God says in Genesis 1:27 and 28 to fill the earth, subdue it, have dominion over it, and to multiply, that promise was given by God to mankind in the garden before the fall. And then after the fall of Adam in the garden and then the curse, none of those topics are even addressed by the Lord in the curse. So a lot was lost with the disobedience, their home, their protection, their provision. She's part of the curse. Women, painful childbearing. The men, sweat of the brow to make grain, to make your bread. You'll toil. The serpent gets cursed as well. On your belly you shall go all the days of your life. But what God said in the garden was never part of the curse. So then I find it interesting, later this month, I want to talk especially about with Noah, because by Genesis 6, it says God regretted putting man on the earth, which is a terrible scripture. I think it's Genesis 6:6. He regretted it. And then that's the start at the basis for the story of Noah's Ark. And after the floods have receded and Noah leaves the boat with his family and God speaks to him again, guess what the first thing God says to him? It's the same thing God said to Adam in the garden, to go fill the earth and to multiply it. But I find that to be interesting. Perhaps God says it because that's the one thing that was never revoked. It's still alive as much today as it was back then. So if that's true, multiplication or being the ability to multiply has always been in mankind's grasp, whether saved or unsaved. It's kind of something that God has put in innately, I think, into every human being. So how do we tap into that? And that's kind of where I wanted to go this month on our subject.
That's really good. And we're excited to hear your messages coming up this month. Our first question is from a concerned parent. You sent this one to me, Pastor Adam. What's with the candy? You give it out on Wednesday nights. If you've never attended our Wednesday night service, Pastor Adam tosses out candy when he asks questions, and people answer them. And you also give it to the kids on every Sunday. Why?
Yeah, I know.
From a concerned parent. Not me.
No. And your kid hits me up as much as any of them.
Yeah, for sure.
Wednesday nights, when I was a youth pastor, just to make sure the kids would be paying attention, and I would have silly trivia and it could be biblical, it could be pop culture or whatever, just to make sure that they're paying attention. I always had a prize, and it was usually Reese's Peanut Butter Cups or Kit Kats, and of course, what junior higher is not going to pay attention when plus they're competitive. And so when we started doing our Wednesday nights here, my wife's like, you should do like what you do with the kids on the midweek services. Have candy available. And a few times I forget. I'll get busy on a Wednesday, and then I'll get up there. I'm like, oh, I don't have any candy. And every time I don't do it, somebody's like, hey, you didn't have the candy tonight. So I try to be faithful with it. For the kids, I have like my little stash of candy for the kids. It's mainly groups of the kids, probably ages 6 to 10, somewhere around there. And I have a feeling I know what parent sent this in, because they cornered me in the hallway when their kids had candy coming out of my office. And I will tell if it's them or not, or any concerned parent about it, I want church to be a good memory for these kids. And I don't want, hey, we're going to church to be battle royale every Sunday morning for families. That's not fun. And nobody's up for that. And after a while, some families just won't come because the kids don't want to come, or, all right, and it's boring. So I want your kids, if you come to this church, I want them to leave here with a positive experience that they've had, that it was fun and that it wasn't boring and that they could make friends. And hey, the pastor gives us candy. And I had one parent says, well, isn't that kind of bribing them? And I said, you know what? I'm not above a bribe. I'm not. I'll be, yes, absolutely. Bingo. I want them to have a great experience. And this is why, because when they get older, life will come at them in all different directions. And where will they turn to? If church was a positive experience for them growing up, and I say that because I know too many people that church was not a positive experience, and they have a harder time giving God a chance later in life, right? Because they had their heart broken, or they were whatever, ostracized, but the ones who have a good experience growing up with church, they will be way more receptive to giving it a chance later in life. So that's why I do it.
What is that? You can draw more flies to honey than a gallon of gall or whatever it is. It just, you're doing that brings me memories of my grandparents. Yeah. And anytime we would go and visit the octogenarians or the older seniors of our childhood, Grandpa would have a jar of candy, or my grandma used to have the little mini size bars, the candy bars, and you could always get one. But it took a very awkward situation of being a little kid and going into everybody's grandparents. At least for me, growing up was kind of scary.
I have grandkids, and I keep getting the talk from my kids, like, we're leaving the kids with you. Here are the rules.
Yeah.
And I'm polite and I listen to them all, but I don't follow those because you're in my house, or you're under my care. It's Grandpa's rules, right? Yeah. And my rules are, let's have a little fun. We're gonna have a little ice cream, maybe a candy, go to the movies. And I did have one parent a couple weeks ago go, well, you could have celery sticks and carrots. I got to be honest, one of my last memories of playing Little League is every time we won, we'd have like chocolate donuts or pizza night and sodas. And I know times have changed. But on the cusp of that, we had one mother that would, she brought apple slices, and which I got nothing against it. But when the chocolate donuts were opened, they got devoured immediately. I bet that woman went home with a bunch of apple slices afterwards. And I know they're healthier, and I know they're probably better for you, but I don't know. To me, it's part of being a kid.
Yeah. And
it's a part of growing up. And am I old school with this? I know I am. I absolutely am. And am I helping to cause cavities? Or I've had people say obesity. I was like, they only get one or two candies. Yeah. It's a treat. That's I want them to come back. And also, I don't want them to be scared of me.
No. I
was terrified of the priest at our parish. I grew up Catholic. If he came walking in, like, we had to straighten up, and or a few of the nuns were really mean. And I don't want that. I want the kids of this church, if they see me, they come to me. Because they know,
yes,
right, that I'm very approachable and I have good stuff hidden away in my little stash in my office. So that's why.
That's a great answer. Thank you for your concern, parent with the concern questions. We hope we answered your question.
We will pray for your concern.
Yeah, we'll pray. We will bless the food. It's not
under
what goes,
advisement.
It's not what goes in a man that defiles him, but what comes out, right?
That's right. Quote Jesus.
There you go. Speaking of quoting Jesus, from the Iron Men the other day, Donnie asks and would like to know what your favorite parable of Jesus is and why.
Well, that's a good question, Donnie. In fact, on my last vacation I took, and we were on vacation with Pastor Jason Sides and his lovely wife, Katie, down in Mexico. And this was one of the First it was, what's your favorite of all the miracles or the signs and wonders of Jesus? And then it got into the parables. And I remember he said the prodigal son. And I'll be on. And then we had Meredith Zamora come about 2 months later, and she preached a new version or a new slant or an angle on it. And I loved it because I say that to say I didn't say the prodigal son was my favorite. To me, and I'll ask you as well, it's hard, but the one that's always touched my heart the most is the Good Samaritan. And because it's just about human care and who really cared about the person that was in need. And I can remember first time I read it from start to finish, I was about 7 or 8 years old, and it struck me then. I've preached it a few, here and there over the years, and it always strikes me then. And I've always had good results every time I've preached it, either at a youth camp or at church or my version of it. And I told Pastor Jason, the ones that are my favorites are the ones that I don't just have one slant on or one angle. Because I really do believe Jesus taught in parables for a reason. He wanted to hear what your interpretation of what it was he was saying. Most of them, a few times he'll give a conclusion to it. He'll say the terror is this and the sower was this. But a lot of times you don't get an explanation. So, but there's many that over the years, the Good Shepherd, the 99 sheep, going after the one is a beautiful one. And in the Gospel of Matthew, they lump a bunch of them together. The woman looking for the lost coin, the stranger coming in the middle of the night. You get back to back to back. I like this topic, Donnie, because personally, wouldn't this be a great question to Jesus? Of all of them he taught, I'm sure there was others that probably weren't recorded or have been lost to antiquity or what have you. What was your favorite and why? But which one do you like, Jess?
So the one that I'm immediately, for whatever reason, is the one of the 10 virgins who go out to meet the bridegroom, and it just really speaks of preparedness, and then the fact that only a handful of them were prepared, and those were the ones that were invited to the feast, and so I've always wanted to, I don't know, we've talked about on this podcast exercising your salvation with fear and trembling. I know it's Ted's favorite subject, but I've always felt this honor and this respect for a healthy fear of the Lord. And I think that constantly being reminded that he could come at any moment and he could come at any time, and to live our life, not in fear, but like to the fullest. Right. And so I hear in the parable with the virgins being ready or not ready, like he talks about how so many of them were just cavorting and having a good time and like not living with purpose. Right. And so to me, I really, that parable really resonates with being purposeful and being ready for.
Well, the topic then would turn into, what's your least favorite?
Jeez.
Yeah.
Well, what's
is
yours?
That even possible? Yeah. Well, I've always had a hard time. Well, the unjust judge, where the woman keeps coming to him, avenge me, avenge me. She finally gets her way only because she just kind of wore him out. Which, I don't know, to me, that tempers the victory of the parable. Right? Or he's the unjust, what do they call him? He's the accountant, right? When he knows he's been a dirty crook for an accountant, and that he's got to give a testimony of what he's been doing and what is owed and blah, blah, blah. So he goes and cuts deals.
I think for me, I think the one that's always been kind of difficult is, and I'm not sure,
the unjust
I'm
steward.
Like trying to think of whether it's a parable of Jesus or a parable of Paul. But the one where he's talking about, I'd rather have you be not hot or cold, but not lukewarm.
Oh, that's in Book of Revelation.
And the fact that it's like, well, you'd rather have me full on sinning or righteous and religiously? Like, wait, I understand the righteous one, but the whole like living La Vida Loca, I don't know that I could like. I
can't picture you doing that.
But being lukewarm and just kind of like hanging out, like, because so many of us, we try to just live life hanging out and, not good times, not bad times, just kind of even keel and balanced. So to kind of put your brain around the fact that's kind of a parable that's hard for me to.
Yeah, I think that's the point of teaching with parables. They are supposed to, let's be honest, the 12 had a hard time with it.
Yeah.
Twice they come to Jesus on the side.
Why don't you speak in English, man?
Why can't you talk clearer?
Or
why
whatever.
even the mysteries? Why the riddles? Why the, right? But I think the whole point of it is that each person has an interpretation of it. And what do you get out of it? So I kind of wish I had more of my father's pretty good at it, of just taking everyday little life and kind of creating a modern day little parable regarding some truth. And I think he's very, very good. And there's others, but I guess I have more of a brain and a quality. Last Sunday, I talked about two disciples, Philip and Andrew, on the same story. They're both believers. They're both part of Jesus's team. They're both highly coveted by the Lord. And when Jesus, according to the Gospel of John, is about to have the multiplication of the loaves and the fishes, these are the only two who talk. And Jesus asks Philip, tell them all to sit down because we're going to feed them all. And Philip immediately says, Lord, not 200 denarii worth could buy enough bread to feed this crowd. Which he wasn't lying, right? He's got a very rational mind. Here's the problem. Andrew, on the other hand, he just brings a little boy with a little boy's lunch, which you think, I bet when he said, well, I found this little boy who's willing to give you his lunch, I bet Philip probably went, great, what's that going to do? Well, what did that do? It fed everybody. So I think at times I'm too much of a Philip as a disciple, and I need to be a little bit more of an Andrew. Maybe I don't have it all or don't have enough, but what I do have, I should be willing to give it to the Lord, put it into his hand.
It's the seed of creativity, or it's the seed of creating something, I guess.
Well, and if Jesus was there in Genesis 1 and that's never been revoked, in his hand is still the power of multiplication. So,
amen.
Yeah. Good question, Donnie.
Good question, Donnie. The next question is from, let's go ahead and go to, since we're talking a little bit in the New Testament, Virginia sent in a question online. If you have questions, please.
Yes, please.
There's a box in the lobby. You can handwrite them. You can also go to the Jubilee Bridge app, and you can go on Facebook or text us your questions. Virginia sent this question in. She says, in Galatians, the Apostle Paul is trying to correct the teaching that has crept into the church by the Judaizers to push the new converts to follow the Mosaic law and be circumcised in order to be accepted by God. Correct. Why did Paul circumcise Timothy then, as stated in the books of Acts? Wouldn't this action confuse the new converts? We see him being so bold and going up against the others, even Peter. Why then would he cave into the Jews to have Timothy circumcised?
This is a great question. Who's this?
Virginia Froling.
Oh, great question, Virginia. Yeah. Well, number one, the timeline of the two events probably are probably about a decade apart by the time Paul writes Galatians, and by the time that Timothy was circumcised was prior. So, yeah, she's right. According to the book of Acts, Timothy as an adult gets circumcised, which that's quite a decision. That's more than a little tattoo being placed on you or this or that. The reason is because Paul is being asked to speak.
Hold on, for clarity, was Timothy not Jewish?
No,
what's Timothy's?
He's Greek.
Okay,
he's Greek. He's a Greek kid, and we know his mother Lois, his grandmother's name Eunice. He was a Greek kid. And but Paul is using synagogues as his place of ministering, right? And again, synagogues back in that day were a little different than what synagogues are today. You go to synagogue now because there is no temple. That's, in fact, a Jew, that's kind of their slang. Let's go to temple, right? So back then it was not, because there was a temple standing. Synagogue was more for the men of the community to get together, to pray, to handle business, to commerce, and to converse. So Paul would use this knowing that Jews were going to be there. But for first-time visitors, right, I would think 90% of the time it would be the same group and everybody knew one another.
So Timothy would have had to wear the Jewish clothes and cover his head. And
if they asked, are you circumcised, he would have had to prove it. Yeah, so being a greeter.
We've seen those bathrooms in Israel there,
Yes.
and they're all lined up too. There's no private restrooms.
They want to inspect. You don't want to be a greeter at the old synagogue. Anyway, so for Timothy to be able to come in with Paul, who Paul is training, Paul is discipling Timothy into the ministry. For Timothy to go everywhere that Paul's going, he had to get circumcised. Or he had to decide it. And then 10 years later to the Galatians. But remember, too, the church of Galatia is in kind of modern-day Asia Minor. Very far from Jerusalem. But when Paul's taking Timothy with him, he's more in the sphere from Antioch around the Mediterranean.
He's not teaching.
The further you get away from Jerusalem, the least religiosity there is in regards to this. So the theory is, Virginia, because you're not the first to come up with this parallel of this question. Some people have even said Paul was a hypocrite because he made his own guy do it. Now he's telling the Galatians, don't do it. I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. I think that Paul has changed quite a bit in the 10 years by the time he's writing this book. First off, this book, more than any of the other 13 epistles Paul writes, is a rebuke. No ifs, ands, or buts. Right? To the Philippians, it's a praise letter, and I love you, and every time I think about you, I swoon. I'm paraphrasing here. But to the Galatians, who has bewitched you? Oh, you foolish Galatians. So let's don't beat around the bush. So obviously, there had been, in the 10 years, people, traveling ministers, Judaizers, who have gone through the church there that Paul has planted and is saying, no, you're not real deal because you're not circumcised. Get back to the true faith, which will enhance your new faith. And Paul is saying, don't do that. Because if you want to go down that road, where does it end? Right? Then you got to take a pilgrimage back. You're going to be eating kosher things. You're opening Pandora's box again. We've moved away from that. Don't go down that path. So I'm wondering if Timothy, reading the Galatians book later, is going, hey, why didn't you feel that way 10 years ago? You would have saved me a really
uncomfortable few days.
A month. So it's a great question that I can't 100% answer, just hypothesize. I think that by the time of Paul's life, let's be honest, he's already said that I shake the dust off, he tells the Jews. I'm done with you. I'm going to go to the Gentiles. He boldly boasts that. I think something had happened in those 10 years to Paul that he had pretty much had enough. And then the irony of ironies is the end of his life. He goes back to Jerusalem. They hadn't seen him in years. He even shaves his head in case he's recognized, right, that he's in contrition. I'm very sorry. Right, because he just wants to see Jerusalem with his own eyes and he gets arrested there for being a heretic. He's going to get beaten, and then he even says, I'm a Roman citizen. Yada. My point is that he was probably right. With the New Testament opening to the Gentiles, the baptism of the Holy Spirit, all of these are New Testament pillars, and if you leave them on their own, they stand and they're great. But you want to start putting in a ton of the old law, the Mosaic law, on top of it, that will overshadow, I think, is what Paul is thinking. So by the time he writes Galatians, I'm done with it. You should be done with it too. Don't even go down that road. So that's my 2 cents on it, Virginia. But that you just ask a question that Bible colleges bandy about.
Yeah, that's really good. And I'm glad to see that these types of situations are in the Bible, because it does speak to the fact that you do the scripture is holy writ, but you also have to consider the times. You need to, if you want to become a theologian or a Bible student, being able to take in the entire time frame and history and all of that
what's going on in their world at that time.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It speaks to women in the church. It speaks to all these complicated subjects that have gone on for
all
eons.
The way to our own times now, with homosexuals in the pulpit, or gender identity now being part of the church. There's a big article I saw the other day, and I'm thinking, if they want to open that little door, that becomes the tantamount message of that pulpit.
And I love the finality of Paul addressing the circumcision and recognizing that it's the heart, and it is parable. Like we're not literally going to circumcise our heart, but if you have come to the faith to Christ, to Christendom, and are all in, then you will have a permanent change.
You should, or then what's happened if there is no change?
Yeah.
Right. So great question.
Great question. Our next question comes from Michael from Ironman. He asks, it seems that Pilate wanted to let Jesus go, but yet the Jews withstood him. Why didn't he just rule over them?
Ah, wow. That's another one, Michael. It does appear that way, especially if you go if all we had was the Gospel of John, then yes, Pilate and Luke. Pilate's a very almost apologetic or almost a sad figure, because the writings do appear that he really had no aught against this traveling minister from the Galilee. He wasn't, if he wants to preach and he's healing people. Even Jesus's detractors admitted he healed people.
And his wife is
in one gospel, his wife's like, don't touch this man. I had a dream about him. And it does appear that Pilate kind of is going to finagle. But again, look, you got to look at the times. Pilate is the Roman authority over this whole province that they would call Judea and even Palestine. The Romans I'm talking about. But under Roman law, you could worship the gods of the region, not only in Jerusalem, right? The Roman Empire was immense. So they would keep all the local gods, local customs. The Romans, you could do this, but you had to pay taxes to Rome. You could be conscripted by Rome, which means like drafted, used as engineers, road paving. You had no say in the matter, as long as you kept the peace, right? And Rome would bring in medicine, pave your roads, build you aqueducts. You had fresh water, and all these. That's what the Roman system was. And it had great, incredible success. I think arguably as much success as any of the great empires throughout human history. They always had a problem in Jerusalem, though, because from the Roman perspective, hear me, these crazy Jews only want to worship one God. And there is no other God. In fact, if you talk about it, they get so irate that they want to fight. They'll get violent. So of all the dozens, if not hundreds of provinces throughout the Roman Empire, to be delegated the one of Judea was a daunting task. Because the people that you're governing hate your guts. In fact, we'll say, we're saved and you're going to hell. So this is what Pilate's been dealing with. And there's lots of sources on Pontius Pilate. Not only the Jesus account, in fact, there's more sources regarding his interaction with the Sanhedrin, the Jewish elite. And it's not going well. In fact, they've already ran his predecessor out. He couldn't take it anymore. So Pilate comes in with a heavy hand. And it says 3 years before Jesus, according to Josephus, Pontius Pilate crucified, I think it's 200 and some odd people. Heavy-handed. You're going to follow Roman law, whether you like it or not. And if you even shoplift, here's the punishment. Heavy-handed. That almost backfires on him. He's about to lose his job because of the Sanhedrin are going behind his back to the governor, who's a higher position. Remember, Pilate's only a proconsul. That's what it's called. He's just he'd be like the chief of police, not the mayor, not of the enforcement of the garrison there. So Now he's under pressure. He's about to lose his job. So now he goes the opposite way. He's being very accommodating. Other writings say he even dined with the high priest. Right? He's trying to be Mr. Détente. Let's smoke a peace pipe. Let's cut a few deals. And then the Jesus situation is dropped on him. So if you know that subtext, what do you do now? The Jews want him dead. Pilate's thinking, well, then you execute him. They did have the law. If they can prove in their own court systems that he's a heretic, then they could have him stoned. But Michael, who sent the question, why would they not have done that? Why didn't they just take it upon themselves to do that? Because they feared the crowds, their own crowds, the crowds of their own Jewish brethren who considered Jesus a prophet or a miracle worker or, dare I say, the Messiah. How you can't do that. And they knew that. So why do they need Pilate? They have to convince Pilate this man is a seditionist and a treasonist. He's causing problems. So that's why Pilate obligates them and has the one-on-one meeting with Jesus. You say you're a king. Are you a king? Right? And my kingdom's not of this world. This is all Pilate trying to feel them out. Is Pilate trying to do the Jewish elites a favor by, I can find a little something on him and I'll scratch their back. Hopefully down the road, they'll scratch my back and they'll quit putting pressure on to my bosses. But then he says, I find no fault with this man. That inflames the Jewish elite, Michael, even more. So they don't back down on this. They send Jesus to Herod, who's at that time kind of a puppet leader, not real authority, but has ears back in Rome. All right. And Herod, this isn't Herod the Great at Jesus' birth. This is now his son or grandson, stepson, actually. And he's more of a joke. In fact, they mock Jesus. They put a crown on his head and they strip him and they send him back. They don't want nothing to do with this. So now the Jews put even more pressure, and they even say, according to one gospel, they're going behind his back again to his boss. So now, here's the kicker, Michael. Pilate thinks, I got him. I finally got these guys. Because in their own law, obviously he's either asking his staff, find me something. They're like, in the book of Leviticus, it says you can find a scapegoat. All right? That's their own law. This isn't Roman law. That's their law. So, of course, he thinks, I've got them. In fact, I'll take Jesus out in front of the crowds. And it says, behold the man. Right? And he says, your own law states that you can have a scapegoat. So I have two criminals here. And Pilate, to make sure he gets what he wants, he pulls out the biggest, lack of a better term, it's a podcast, not church, scumbag he can find. Right? Barabbas, who's already has witnesses, he's a murderer. And says, your own law states we can let one of them go. Who do you want? And in my heart of hearts, I know Pilate thought for sure they'd say, let Jesus go. Let Jesus. But those Jewish elites had already sandbagged the crowd. And of course they yell, we want Barabbas. Pilate's stunned because his own little plan is now backfired. And one of the saddest parts of the gospel, I think, is when Pilate says, well, what about this man? What should I do with him? They yell, crucify him. And that's when Pilate says, I wash my hands of this. I'm done. So, Michael, yes, he could have, but they outplayed him in this little poker game of politics and crowd approval. They outplayed him and like a fiddle. So that's the context of the times. Now, we do know within 5 years, Pilate would be out of the job anyway. So they would get what they want. Right. But obviously a softer hand would come in, but that would lead to their ultimate destruction because under that softer hand, insurrection and treason will grow to the point where the Jews will rebel in 67 AD. And by 70 AD, the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and upturned the temple to this very day. So that's kind of ironic just in itself as well. So, Michael, I hope that kind of answers your question.
I have a question. I heard a pastor teaching about the seed of modern day anti-Semitism. They have sourced, well, it's always going to be around, but they've sourced to evidently Constantine attempting to take the focus off of the Roman crucifixion and putting it on to the Jews as having been the ones to send Jesus to the cross. Have you heard that, or is that
well,
did Constantine make an effort in attempting to?
There is thought about that, or even to highlight. And there's one scripture in John where it says that literally it just says the Jews killed Jesus, right? And that there has been that from a Jewish perspective. They've always thought that the Gospels are the start of the anti-Semite movement from earliest days on, which there might be some validity. We're always looking for a villain, right? But let's be honest, he did not die of Jewish execution, but his execution has Jewish fingerprints from top to bottom on it. He was killed under a Gentile method, which is crucifixion. Jews were forbidden to execute, no matter how bad a person was, in this manner. But I believe heaven orchestrated that, because whether it's Jew or Gentile, they both put Jesus on the cross. And whether it was Jew or Gentile, they both executed him. And that's the beauty of it is that he rose to save Jew and Gentile, even though Jew and Gentile's fingerprints are all over his death.
How was Constantine such an impressive person to do all these things, like our modern image of Jesus, the pagan church practices and all these things?
Biblical archaeology, his mother, Helena, pretty much started. Because history is written by the victors. And after a year where 4 Caesars, it's the year of the 4 Caesars, history calls it, he would be the 4th. Nobody could have enough power base to hold the throne, that Constantine marched on Rome at a place you can visit to this very day called the Milvian Bridge, right outside of Rome, where he had his men the night before. He said he had a vision, and he had them paint a red cross on their shields. And the voice from heaven says, "In this be victorious." And he was. And he consolidates his power immediately, unlike his 3 predecessors in the year. Militarily, then governmentally, and then culturally, and lastly with religion. Within a 3-year period.
What a little organization can
Absolutely.
do.
And foresight.
Wow.
Thinking ahead, right? Because he knew he would be as hated as the other 3. He's just a tyrant. He's over the strongest army. That's the only reason he's in charge, blah, 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 blah. Well, he knows that as well. He's no dummy. So immediately he starts reorganizing the empire. He knows Rome itself is so corrupt that he has to have a new capital. This would be the start of the Byzantine, right? He moves it, and he calls the new city. Today it's Istanbul. Back then it was Constantinople, named after himself. And it wasn't as corrupt. He's going to rule the empire from this new city. It would almost be like, to the point we all call Washington, D.C. the swamp. Is it so corrupt that somebody really can't get things truly done there? Will we be like modern Romans, eventually say, we got to get out of the swamp?
Yeah.
And I'm not prophesying this, but I'm just saying at times history does have a tendency to repeat itself. So,
speaking of history, we have 2 last questions, and they kind of go together. I'll ask them both at the same time, and then I'll allow you to make the 2 with wherever direction you'd like to go. The first question is about love marriages, and the question, these were both sent in online by anonymous askers. Were love marriages prominent in antiquity, or were they mostly arranged? And then the second question is, why was the Song of Solomon a book in the Bible? So since the 2 go hand in hand.
Oh, good questions.
They're both love focused for sure.
Well, without a doubt, first part of a question, almost all marriages in the Bible that are chronicled were arranged. Families arranging it with other families, a dowry, these types of things. It's interesting. I've done a lot of ministry over the years, my wife as well, in India, and this is still a practice that is used in many cultures around the world. Us being Westerners, we look at this like, oh my God, this is the worst thing ever. But yet, we have a 54% divorce rate in the West, United States, Canada, Western parts of Europe. And the parts that still do arranged marriages have less than a 10% divorce rate. That's just the numbers. All right. And at times people could say, well, you can't divorce. Your family will ostracize you. I don't want to get too far into the weeds in this. But the older I get, and we have many Indian families in the church, and I'm not talking, third generation living in no, I'm talking they were the ones who immigrated. We're close to Silicon Valley, so many of them have come out here for high-tech jobs or have been recruited by the big heavyweights here in the valley, and they're making a new lease on life. Well, this is the one topic I think they have the biggest trouble wrapping their brains around it, because from their perspective,
it's the only way.
They're seeing how we do it, and how we do it is all based off of feelings, romance.
Well, look where that got King David. Lust.
Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Right? Right? Well, can she cook? I don't care. She's great in the bed, right? Can he do this? Well, he looks good in those Wranglers. And from their perspective, it's kind of, really? That you're going to make a life decision based off of that? But we've been inundated with every love story has a happy ending, and the girl gets the guy, or the guy gets the whatever. And I get that. But the older I get, I start seeing their method. We think, well, you don't even meet your potential husband till your wedding day. No, that's not what that is. And it wasn't in the Bible either. Isaac saw Rachel, but he didn't ask her out. He went and talked to her family. Okay? And then once the family thought, yeah, we like this kid, they start arranging things. This is how it's done in India. And the families come together. I start thinking that the more I look at it, I like their version of this, because when both families are behind it, both families will do what it takes to help make it work. Everybody's pulling at it. All right. Most Americans how many times have you been at a family function? You're like, here's my fiance. You're just meeting him.
Yeah. Right.
Right. And, right. And
that's nice.
Hi, what's your name again?
How long have you known each other? Right?
Yeah. Or meet my new husband, and it just gets dropped on you. And then, of course, what if you don't like him? Secretly, you might even be wishing it doesn't work. Right? They don't have those issues over there, because everybody's already come to an agreement before the wedding day that both families are on board with this. And I think that is a better way. However, there are exceptions in the Bible. One would be David and Abigail. That David saw Abigail and immediately fell in love. And the Bible says she was a woman of good appearance. So you can figure what that means. But other than that, they're very few and far between. Most marriages were family arranged, family set up. There was no dating sites. In fact, this whole concept of dating was out the door. Families come together and then you start courting. Right? And it doesn't mean it's a done deal. And our Indian friends even say it doesn't mean it's a done deal. But if you want to go outside these parameters, then you're going to have a tough time with your family. So back to that, so if the Bible was put into a movie genre, romantic comedy probably wouldn't be one of the categories for that. So,
well, I don't typically share my marriage testimony very often, because it seems even to me a little hard to believe, but I do believe. And I think that if you're single and you're listening to this and you're waiting, that you can have like I had a prearranged marriage, but it was chosen. My husband was chosen by the Holy Spirit, and I trusted him. And I was driving my car one day, and I had totally given up the thought of getting married or having a family or anything, because I was just Jesus. I was a sellout. I decided to marry Jesus, and so Jesus and I were married, and I didn't need nobody or nothing. And I heard an audible voice say, the next guy you meet, the next new guy you meet is going to be the guy that you're going to marry. And if you don't sleep together until the honeymoon, I will make sure you will have as many children as you like. And that was a big heart pull on me, because I always wanted to, as an only child, I always wanted to have a big family. And I heard the Lord tell me the next new guy that I meet was going to be the one I was going to marry. And so to me, that's always stood back in my mind, because my husband now, and we'll be celebrating 29 years this year of marriage, but my husband was the next new guy that I met, and we were married within 90 days of our first meeting. And so to me, it's always been in the back of my mind a prearranged marriage, because I did get a direction and I followed it. And in our most difficult years of being married and having a family, I've always gone back to that, like, okay, Lord, you chose him. I don't know why, but you did, and I trust you. And so it's kind of living under that blanket of having the choice made for me, but I will submit to
That's a great thing, because I'm sure somebody's out there going, that's great, families come together. My family's all jacked up, Pastor Adam, so
yeah.
I wouldn't want them picking my spouse, let alone my next outfit or car or anything, and I get that. So, but prearranged spiritually or through the family or what have you, it is the biggest decision of your life, and you should be making it very soberly, I think, and very rationally. And it can't just be on hormones because after I've been married we're going to have 28 years this year in September. Those things come and go, and they fade, or they, and it's got to be built on something stronger.
And there's something to the scripture that says, honor your parents, honor your father and mother. And if your father and mother are God-fearing and they have some red flags or some, like, I would hope that any believer that's listening to this, considering getting married, has talked to their parents or their family about, like, the person, because outsiders do tend to have an outside point of view, because when you're in love, like Pastor said, everything's
blind.
Great.
You're blind. What was the second part?
The second part was, why was the Song of Solomon included in the Bible?
That's a great question, because over the years, a lot of people have wanted it to be taken out. Not that it's not an important book, because it's not really, is it canonical, right? Meaning it's...
Talk about parables.
Yeah. And it cracks me up when I hear people try to say, well, it's really about God's love for man. No, it's not. It's a love poem with no ifs, ands, or buts. This is why. Who wrote it? There's no debate. Solomon, which we know Solomon wrote Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, which nobody has a problem with either one of those books. So we already know beyond a shadow of a doubt that Solomon wrote Song of Songs, or even Song of Solomon, depending on your translation of Bible, same book. How can you throw it out? How can you keep it out when you already know? And Jesus himself, none were wiser than Solomon. So they don't want to, because of the gravitas of the authorship is so immense, it's going to go in. Here's the kicker. They try to reinterpret it, making it much more spiritual than it really is. It's really a love poem. But who doesn't want to be in love? My problem is when it comes to love, that was probably Solomon's weakest point, because we know he had numerous wives, he had hundreds of concubines, and I'm not going to get much into that. If you don't know what that is, you can Google that. I think Solomon had a problem with falling in love, but he was the descendant of David, who I've already used that example. All of David's greatness, his one downfall was he liked women.
It's interesting though, 'cause I know you talk about the whole process of selecting and making canon and the Vulgate and like which books are going to be included, like that they would all agree that this was one that needed to be insert here.
Well, I'm sure many of them in the Council of Nicaea, 313, I wasn't there, probably had this same question. We can't put this in.
Mm-hmm.
It's ancient eroticism.
Yeah.
It really is.
Mm-hmm.
Right? When he's talking about her pomegranates and her,
Yes.
I'll just leave it at that. But who wrote it? Again, it comes back to this. Right? None were wiser than we have to have it in there. There's no way you can't put it in there. Can you imagine if Moses had a sixth book,
Yeah.
but it had nothing to do with the history of the Jews?
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with
It was growing up in the palace or
Let
whatever.
me tell you how I like to, my days with the sheep on the back of the Midian fort. It would have to go in because of who authored it. So that's where they had. So, but yeah, they would have had all of this. They would have not only what went in, what order do they go in? Right? Somebody would have had to know the dates and the chronological order of all the epistles of Paul.
Why did they choose to put Job all the way in the middle if it was
because that's
first?
the one they have no idea. Most scholars now believe it was probably the first book written, not about the creation of man. I'm talking about
just chronologically
when whoever put the pen to the papyrus or the parchment. It was written before Genesis was written. Doesn't detail events before Genesis, but literally was written. And the reason is because God is never called Yahweh. He's only termed as Elohim.
And it mentions dinosaurs and all that stuff.
Leviathans and right. So they believe it's actually probably the oldest written book in the Bible, not the book that details the oldest thing. So that's why that went in.
Well, I hope that it was
fun.
We hope that you enjoyed this podcast and are inspired to go deeper into the Word and the history around the Word. Pastor Adam, do you have any books on like biblical history that you would encourage us to read, like around the time frames? And is there anything
that don't deal with the biblical stories, or just
more like the culture and like what the people were dealing with during that antiquitous time?
Well, there's a few books. One, I would think, if not from a 500-foot scale, but a 5,000-foot scale, one's called From Alexander to Caesar, right? Which a lot of the events worldwide are going to be talked about, which would have an impact on, obviously, the local Jewish laws and customs. 12 Caesars, a book, is an excellent book regarding that. Not the second half of the book, because it's kind of details after the book of Acts, and that's kind of a mystery time and Jerusalem had been become solvent by then. But it does show the rise of Vespasian and his son Titus, who would be the destructors of Jerusalem. But you got to kind of have a historical mind if you're going to enjoy these types of books. They're not light reads, and but there's others. Maybe by next month I'll bring about 2 or 3 that are really. But there's one called Customs and Manners of the Bible, which really helps me. I bought that in Bible. I don't remember the author's name, but Customs and Manners of the Bible. Okay. So it does Old and New Testament. That really helped me when I was in Bible college.
I'll check it out. Well, everybody, thanks again for tuning in and liking, sharing, subscribing, whatever your way of spreading out the word, that Ask Adam is here for you. So send a question to Adam.
Yeah. Love you. Have a great June, everybody. We'll see you in July.
Happy Father's Day, too.
Yes.
All you dads out there. God bless. Bye-bye.